Hey everyone, welcome back to Seasons Podcast. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Doug.
And we are here for a special two-part conversation about finding common ground, something that feels really hard in the time that we're in. And we're specifically having these conversations around the season that we're in politically. We're approaching November, which means that we have a decision to make about who our next president is going to be. And what we're seeing all around our country and really around the world is that this is a thing that is plaguing everyone's mind, this choice that we have on who's going to be our president. And we're seeing that it's dividing people. It's dividing people in relationships. It's dividing people in the workplace. But for us, I think our biggest burden is dividing people in the church. And so for Pastor Doug, I think this has been something burning within you. And when I think of, the news every day, they're talking about this thing. So why are we adding our voice today to this conversation?
Yeah, I think, when I talk to people during political season, they're saying things like, I can't talk to my brother for the next 3 months, or, our group, we can't meet, or we can't have these conversations. And I sort of scratch my head and wonder, like, what's happened out there in the world has gotten in here in the church. And so, our call is to be peculiar people who don't read the same scripts everyone else reads. And so my deepest conviction is that we need to be people characterized by love. At the end of the day, Jesus said, people will know you're my disciples by the way you love each other.
Yep.
And so how do we do that when we don't agree? And those are big questions.
Yeah. And so we're going to have two conversations. This first one is going to be kind of about you personally. How do you find that firm foundation as you approach November and you mark those boxes on your ballot? How do you approach that responsibility? How do you hold that as a conviction before the Lord? And then how do you let go of that as you have the next day and the next day? How do you approach Christmas and the new year after you've made your vote? And then in our second conversation, we're going to get more practical in approaching your relationships, approaching maybe some relationships that have been broken or relationships that seem hard to have these conversations. And how do you as a Christian live in community, but maybe disagree? That's something that we're all maybe finding a little hard this season, but we want to help you. So these are going to be hopefully helpful conversations for you, quick, practical, but rooted in the heart of Jesus. That's what our heart is for you, is to go into the Bible and see what Jesus has to say about this, and then help you obviously make informed decisions this political season. So first question, Doug, who are you voting for?
Yeah. So the reality is we're voting for more than president.
Yeah.
So, but the most important question is not who we vote for, though that's a very important choice. It's who am I going to be during this season? And how am I going to respond to people who I disagree with?
Yeah.
Because it's the character of Christians that are really going to draw people to a relationship with God. And so it's really asking that question, God, when I don't agree with these people, or I'm passionate about the subject and other people aren't, how do I respond? And I think of Philippians 1:27, where Paul says, whatever happens, conduct yourself worthy of the gospel of Christ. So there's a call to Christian character, even when people don't agree.
But what about, for a lot of people, like you're saying this beautiful thing that is very true, but I think so many people are focused on that one question. Yeah. So how do you help people get past that into the, wait, no, it is actually more important who you are than what you mark on that day?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is people will often approach an election with this overdeveloped sense of control. Like, if I can get everyone to vote like I vote, the world will be a better place.
Right.
The reality is no one has that control. You don't have that control in your family, in your marriage, with your roommates.
And do you want it?
So the pressure to say, if we don't get this right, the whole world falls apart. So the reality is that's not true. There are things worth fighting for sure. Yeah. But the idea that God is sovereign, that God is in control, that God knows who the next leader will be in our nation, and frankly, all the other nations that have had elections over this last year, that we trust in God's sovereignty. So we don't vote in fear. We don't vote in anger. We don't vote with this hyper hysteria. We vote with a sense of peace and the joy that we have that. And that release changes sort of the tone, I think, for me, for how I vote and for how I process an election that may not go my way.
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point. Like, I think here in America, we've built this idea that we are the center of the universe, that everything revolves around America. And we have positioned ourselves much to be that way in the world. But there are political decisions happening all around the globe. People are voting for their leaders. They're not voting for the same leaders we are.
I think there were 64 elections all over the world this year. So 64 countries go through this, and they don't have Republicans and Democrats and blue and red. They have their own issues. They have their own kind of policy decisions to make. And so we sometimes just think American-centric, but the gospel is world-centric.
Okay, so something in America that we do, we literally have a pledge. It says, I pledge my allegiance. What we've done is we've pledged our allegiance to a party first, instead of to the things that either that party is representing, or more importantly, like the values that we hold. So can you talk a little bit just about like how to reprioritize our allegiances in light of a political season, but who we really are, like the values that we hold and all of those things? What should that look like for us?
Yeah, I think a lot of the disagreements and conflicts are around allegiances that are misaligned. So if I say my allegiance is to Christ and his kingdom, then my script is going to come from the Bible versus a partisan script that comes to me. So I'm going to question everything that comes to me outside of God's word with that lens of how do I see this through the eyes of the kingdom of God? And so I want to be, I love this phrase. I want to be an unreliable ally to anything outside the kingdom of God. Like sometimes I might support what you believe based on the Bible, and sometimes I might not. My loyalty isn't to you, it's to God. So I think that's a big thing. So it causes us to ask maybe different questions about a partisan agenda or platform and say, I want to question that based on what I know from God's word. And I want to develop a conviction. And out of that conviction, I want to vote. And that way I have a clear conscience before God versus just punching the line. I think a lot of people vote. It's sort of like the Christmas tree. You're just like A, B, C, or give me the guide and I'm going to vote all this way or all this way.
Yeah.
And not really thinking about some of the maybe nuances and details of each candidate, each amendment, even things like school board members. And so I think that's part of the developing of a conviction based on your kingdom values.
Yeah. And people are just almost blindly like putting all of their vote into, this whole thing instead of seeing, like you're saying, everything that is held underneath that you actually have a voice in. You actually get to choose some of the things that are outside of that. But sometimes we just, with our allegiance, like go that way and you don't realize like, oh, I didn't vote with my conscience or my values because I just went the whole way, one way. Or you do like the Scantron high school thing where it's like, I haven't filled in C in a while.
Do people do Scantron anymore? I don't even know.
I don't know if they do, but
You just age yourself.
90s baby. Hey, shout out to my people. I want to read this to you. It's talking about wisdom in this age. And I want to get your thoughts on what this says. It says, finally, I have learned that the Christian community needs to reprioritize wisdom in order to live faithfully in a discontinuously different culture. Submerged as we are in a society that values fairness over justice, consuming over creating, fame over accomplishment, glamour over character, image over holiness, and entertainment over discernment, we need a blueprint for what life is meant to be. How can we live in but not of lives in the world that surrounds us? In a culture skeptical of every kind of earthly authority, where information is dirt cheap and institutions and leaders so often disappoint, we need God-given wisdom.
Yeah, I think it's right on. We, as Christians, we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world.
Yeah.
So we still are involved politically. We're still involved in our schools and our communities and our state and our country, but we're involved in a different way.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I think the worst parts of what's happening in our culture today is people are disconnecting their Christian principles and convictions from their Christian character and values. So people are saying things like, this is war, we have to fight. The rules are off. The ends justify the means. And when the world says that, you get that. It's all about sheer raw power.
Right,
but when Christians say that, you sort of go, that's interesting that you're contradicting 2,000 years of Christian history, or at least the best parts. And you're looking back at like the Crusades when people said you could do whatever you want as long as you win Jerusalem, as long as you win a convert.
Yeah. You
can do unspeakable things. And so I think the way we speak and the way we act matters most. Peter says, when someone looks at your life and they ask you about the gospel, you should share the hope that you have in your heart with gentleness and respect. So even if someone talks maliciously about you, they're convicted by their own behavior, not justified by yours.
Right.
And so, all through the Gospels, Colossians 4, your word seasoned with salt, with grace, the word you say, the way you act, the way you fight for your convictions, it matters to God and it matters to the world that's watching.
Yeah.
Because when people see Christians behaving like this, our faith looks no different than all the people they see on the infotainment news. That's just, it's news masquerading as entertainment, or vice versa. It's just, it's not really, it's meant to create this algorithm of fear and of anger and of justified rage that we see happening all around us.
Yeah. And that brings me exactly to where I wanted to go to, is where people are getting their information from. We live in this day where everything is available to us at any time. Like, whether it's information about politics, or it's information about a hurricane that's coming, or something that just happened with a celebrity, whatever, you can find the opposing opinion or opposing information from your sources, no matter what time of day. So as something as heated as this political season, we're hearing all sorts of voices from all different types of people. But in the church, we're hearing a lot of different opinions and a lot of different voices, a lot of different, like you're saying, approaches to what they're saying. And so where should people be getting their news from? Where should people be getting influenced from, online or in their lives or wherever?
Yeah, and what you're saying, this is the reason why America is so divided and why Christians are so divided. They're getting completely different news feeds and completely different information about the same topics. And so they're like, don't you see? We've got a mutual friend who's afraid of being attacked by animals.
Yeah.
And every day, because he always clicks on alligator attack, dog attack, cat, every day there's another danger of an animal attacking. And
right.
He's always
so the world is so scary.
Freaked out. I'm like, I never get this on my feed because the algorithm feeds you what you click on. And most people don't understand, if you're looking for things that are speculative or conspiratory, or you're looking for things that are sensationalized, every time you click, it drives you deeper into that, because the algorithm just gives you what you're asking for. So part of it is how do I get my news sources? How do I get maybe something a little more on the left and a little more on the right? And so I'm seeing two views, because we're developing critical spirits, but not critical minds. So we're not processing information.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is when people post, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. So, I could say, John is the Antichrist. And if 4,000 people like it, I get this dopamine rush and people share it. And it doesn't matter that that's not true, or I slandered or destroyed someone's life. It just matters that people liked it and I feel better about myself. And this is the way our, infotainment, or whatever you want to call it, and all social media things are happening, is the truth doesn't matter anymore. There's not an objective process of determining, is this true? And how do I find out more information about this? We just forward it. And one of my challenges to people is, would you make a commitment that if you ever forwarded or liked something publicly or said something on your social media that you found out later wasn't true, would you have the integrity to issue a public apology to all your followers?
Wow.
And if not, then you're caught in the game.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is something that people just don't bear the weight of, is how easy it is to click repost, reshare, send to this person. And yet so often people are not taking the time to actually research, is everything that is said in here true? Everything. Because if there's just one thing that's not, then you're basically stamping that, hey, I stand with everything that this is. And, we're seeing how algorithms are even influencing generations. I look at, young people who are experiencing their first election, and a lot of them are taken over by a celebrity endorsement or by, who's on the most popular podcast. And you're seeing that that's what matters to them,
I vote because it's the person I like, or because a person that I likes them.
Right.
And you don't know their policy, you don't know their character.
And out of that, the opposite, another generation might say, I'm so sickened by that I'm not voting for that, And so we're seeing people make decisions only reacting to other people, instead of, again, getting back to their values and their convictions.
Yeah. And the danger for non-Christians who watch this is that your political preferences, I'll say, can be conflated with your Christian faith, so that people will say, well, if you're a Christian, you'll vote this way. If you're a Christian, you'll see it this way. And many of those cases, not all, but many of those cases, you have this deep confusion. People like, if that's what it means to be a Christian, to speak like that, to act like that, then I don't want anything to do with that Jesus. And that to me, again, is a travesty to the gospel, which is for all people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, like we make this, even this conversation, we make it so much about the presidential box that's going to be on there. But the election is so much more than that. And so much of what's on our ballot affects us locally. Yeah. And yet we put all of our time, effort, stress, worry, anxiety into that one decision, that we miss out on the important research that will affect how we live here in South Florida or wherever you are. And so can you help people know a little bit more how to navigate those decisions wisely? Because I think you have such a great way of finding out more information about those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, for years I would look at like school board member or judges or mayors or police chief, and I'm like, I have no idea.
Every other.
So now I've developed like my insider information. I have an attorney I know and respect who knows many of the judges. I know people who work in the school system and the school board. I know someone who works in my local city, and they know the commissioners, they know the mayor. So I'm always calling. Okay, tell me what they believe. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what is your recommendation, because I trust your eyes on this one.
Yeah.
And that helps me to know how to vote. And so, but you have to do some research. If you think just give me a voter guide, I'm going to check. First of all, it's not even half of what's on your ballot. And second of all, you haven't thought maybe deeply about any of the implications of those decisions. So in some cases, like, at our church, we talk specifically about Amendment 4, which, enshrines, unrestricted abortion access in the state of Florida in the Constitution. So to me, that's an easy one to say, hey, this is what Christians have believed for 2,000 years. We need to protect unborn life. And so I'm voting no on Amendment 4, and I'm encouraging other Christians to. But I know some Christians who won't vote no on Amendment 4. Then the next question is, how do I interact with them? How do I disagree with them and still be in relationship with them? And these are important questions that the gospel compels us to ask.
Yeah. And I think in that there is an invitation, like you said earlier, to just be curious, like what informs that decision for you. And sometimes those decisions are tied to people's work, their advocacy, their life experience. And so when you just throw away like, oh, I can't be friends with them if they're going to vote opposite of me on a biblically moral issue, you're assuming a lot about them that you could find out in a conversation. But also I think there's an invitation too for us to like get involved in politics more too, in the things that we're caring for and advocating for, because that does give us an opportunity to rub shoulders with people that do think differently than us. So can you just talk a little bit about how can people engage deeper beyond a vote, to jump into things that they care about, have more of an impact beyond what they do on that Tuesday in November?
Yeah. So it's not shouting louder, and it's not, shouting as broadly as you can, it's how can I be persuasive in a pluralistic society? A pluralistic society is people are coming with all different, thoughts and processes. And right now the current thing is, how do I crush my political opponent? How do I put them down? How do I make them feel stupid? And somehow they're thinking that's going to win people in the middle or on the other side, but it doesn't persuade anyone. What persuades people are ideas, and especially, biblically rooted ideas. I think of William Wilberforce, who's one of my personal heroes, who for 50 years, it was this sustained campaign of public persuasion that slavery was wrong. And he had deep convictions. He gave his whole life for it. But you'd be hard pressed to find someone that he publicly humiliated with his words or treated poorly. It was the way he did it that eventually won the day. His idea won the day, not, crushing his political opponents by verbally, putting them down or making them feel stupid. And so I look at that going, okay, you can carry deep conviction and kindness at the same time. It actually makes you more persuasive, because most people in our country are in the middle.
Yeah.
And they're looking for what is the right argument, what is the right or just way to live in this world. And if we make the argument in the wrong way, we shut them down from listening.
Yeah.
And we might get pats on our back from all the people on our side, but we're actually not convincing anyone.
Right. You're just talking.
You're just talking.
I want to read this again. And I didn't say this the first time, but this is from a book called You Lost Me. And it's something we read years ago, that's talking about, young people leaving the church and what they're dealing with in their life as a younger generation. And although it's even now, it's not even that long ago, but some of it's just outdated because things are changing so quickly. There's some great things in here. Specifically, this is talking about how to be nonpartisan but not apolitical. So I just want to read this and get your thoughts. Young Christians' flight from the church mirrors a disassociation from formal political institutions, caught between negative associations with the religious right and an inability to square certain policies of the left with their values. Many young Christians go about the political task of enacting justice while remaining avowedly apolitical. Too often, this results in the neglect of effective professional techniques in favor of harmful amateurish activism. Pastors and teachers should challenge millennials and generations below to slow down, lest the opportunities presented by their unique blend of characteristics be wasted. They should encourage youth to inform their passions, to study and abide in the tutelage of those who have gone before. They should remind youth that lasting impacts rarely follow hot zeal, but are often the result of a cold, steeled commitment over a lifetime. Simultaneously, leaders should recognize that many commendable traits of the younger generations, their confidence, preference for teams, prioritization of relationships over ideas, and desire to manifest their values through action make them uniquely suited to refresh and use political institutions for good. And finally, the church has too often avoided political teaching. Paul affirmed the ordained role of the government. Therefore, Christians must develop a theology of political engagement. Leaders must develop an understanding of the congruence between Christian faith and the spheres of civil life and devote time to exploring these concepts with those that they lead.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I love it. I think if you follow the arc of Christian history over 2,000 years, some of the strongest and most long-lasting political movements were led by Christians around issues of justice, around issues of women's suffrage and abolition and justice for children who are working in factories. How do we create a just society for the most vulnerable? And the Christians have always led in those spaces. So I look at this idea of a long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
So I would say to every young person, like getting excited about a particular issue for 6 months is going to do very little good. Or getting excited about just during election season every 4 years is going to do very little in the long scheme. Thinking I can vote and that's my responsibility as a Christian in the world is just very short-sighted. The gospel calls us to go deep and long. And so I encourage people, and I know so many young people who are like, this is my thing. I want to care for vulnerable moms who are in a crisis pregnancy or unplanned pregnancy. I want to walk with them. I want to mentor them. I want to help them. I want to create not just a system, but a movement of Christians who are going to be the people there to walk with these women and these children during this most vulnerable part of their life. And so organizations have been created and they're expanding and they're scaling. And this is something that you see happening, not just for a year or two, but like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, generational type ministries. Same thing with advocating for the unborn or for, areas of justice in criminal, I worked in the Department of Juvenile Justice and saw just so many of the inequities for young men of color and how they're treated differently because of their inability to get legal representation. I worked in really rough schools in Miami. You see the inequity.
Yeah.
The question is someone going to do more than just post about it?
Right.
Or rage about it?
For a month.
Is there a way to, find influence on a school board or to advocate for a change in policy? And that's really the long, deep work of Christian advocacy in a community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I think for anyone who is of any age, but specifically young people, like, man, if you're through this journey of voting in the political season, if you're finding there's an issue that really like makes you come alive, but also breaks your heart, like follow that. Figure out how to take steps in your local community to be an advocate, to be a voice for those people. And do that for your life. Like, let that really be a fuel for a lifetime, because that's where you see change. That's where we see the most inspirational stories. Like, we love to talk about those people that changed the world and think that we can be them in a day because we got passionate for one time, you know? It's like, no, they woke up passionate every single day, even after persecution and a lot of no's and shut doors and being put in prisons or whatever their thing was. They woke up passionate every day for that thing. So I think, as much as we want to say we're passionate in this political season about these things that, we're going to mark down on a ballot. It's like, let's actually see what that looks like in December, in January, in February, and in 2026 and in 2027.
Yeah. Otherwise, what happens is you create this sort of self-righteous smugness that I voted the right way and you didn't. I'm superior to you spiritually, and that doesn't do you any good. That's toxic to your soul, and it creates a divide between you and all the unrighteous people who don't think and vote like you. And that polarization is happening inside the church and outside the church. And it's something that needs to be torn down with the grace of the gospel.
Okay, so as we wrap up this conversation, I just want to ask you one more thing in light of, this opportunity we have to vote. It is a civic responsibility we have. It's something that all of us have a right to do, because there's people that have fought for our freedom here in this country for generations, and something that we shouldn't take lightly. So, I think people are experiencing genuine anxiety about like, man, I don't know if I can vote, or like an apathy of just like, you know what, I want to be done with this. But what would you encourage people about the importance of voting in the season?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, you're not going to find, a verse in the Bible that commands Christians to vote, because democracy didn't exist back in the day. So, but as far as the way I talk to my wife and my kids, as we talk at the Souders, we say like, this is a holy privilege we have. It was purchased by men and women who fought and died for our country. Not everyone in every nation in the world has this privilege, so we need to steward the privilege. So again, we want to pray before we go. We want to develop those convictions. And I know that many times people look at all the things and they don't know, like, I don't know what to vote for. They just leave some of those blank. And there are some Christians who are going to leave part of this blank because they don't have a conviction one way or another. Or for them, that blank is an act of resistance. I'm not going to, go this way or this way. I'm going to vote for where I feel convinced and convicted. Yeah. So it's not a, all or nothing kind of thing in an election. It's praying your conscience, knowing what you believe, and valuing the privilege to vote. That's part of the process.
That's great. All right, so this wraps up part 1 of our conversation. And in part 2, again, we're going to go a little bit more practical on not only how do you approach the vote itself that day, but also how do you approach relationships and conversations with people who think differently than you. And so we invite you to just click over and listen to part 2, and we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Seasons Podcast. Our hosts are Pastor 𝘼𝘼𝙑𝘼𝙍 and 𝘾𝙃𝘼𝙋𝙀. Seasons is produced by Calvary Chapel Fort Lauderdale, and our theme song is Seasons by Connor Henderson with Calvary Music. For more information about our church or this podcast, visit 𝘾𝑼𝑉𝑇L.org. Change makes way for loss. The grief makes way for pain. And all throughout the seasons, you're the one who's in control. Despite my current state, I choose